So, you've put together a majestic creation map. You've named your pantheon. You've designed your holy symbol. You've mapped out the intricate politics of your church and given them a fancy hat. But when your hero walks into the grand cathedral, there is a ledger-sized detail missing. Who paid for the roof? Today, we are talking about the salvation deficit. Gods might not need to eat, but priests do. Prayer is free, but stonemasons require wages. In world building, it is incredibly tempting to treat religion as a top-down force of divine will, especially if your gods are real and actively handing out magic. But the reality is that religion functions as a bottom-up energy extraction system. If a church cannot solvently fund its daily overhead, your God has a problem, because ain't no one gonna tell his stories when they're starving. Welcome to another episode of Just-in-Time World Building with your host, Marie Mullaney. Today, we're talking about the cold economics of religion and how fixing the faith's ledger can fix your world. There are three primary financial models or nodes that dictate how a temple operates. Node 1 is the church functioning as a central bank. In a lawless or developing world, trust is the rarest commodity on the map. Religion solves this scarcity by declaring that higher beings are watching the scales and enforcing fair trade. Under this model, you build the trust required for economic activity directly out of the faith people put in their gods. And this isn't a modern theory. It is exactly how the earliest recorded religions worked. Religion essentially started as a banking system. In Bronze Age Mesopotamia, around the 3rd millennia BCE, temples were agricultural creditors, grain storage vaults, and risk partners. If you needed an emergency loan, you went to the temple to take out a marsh, which was literally an interest-bearing debt. The temple owned the surrounding fields, claiming both land rents and corvée labor, unpaid forced labor, from the peasantry. By the time we look at Egypt, we see the merger of crown and temple. Wealth was measured in the deben, a standard metal weight unit of account. Here, Egyptian rulers granted royal land and a direct cut of the state's grain taxation to the temples. Monarchs did this because they desperately needed the temple's spiritual legitimacy, but they also needed the centralized revenue infrastructure. And this creates a fertile tension between the secular rulers and the religious authorities that you can exploit for storytelling. This tension is the exact reason why Sargon of Akkad, when conquering the Sumerian city-states around 2300 BCE, didn't just smash the local cultures, but also claimed their gods and incorporated their temples directly into his imperial authority, capturing both their economic revenue and their institutional trust. We see this pattern repeat across history. Whenever a state fractures and societal trust deteriorates, people look to stable institutions to safeguard their wealth. It's why the Buddhist monasteries became titanic holders of wealth during China's Tang dynasty in the 7th through 9th centuries. The monks weren't necessarily greedy hoarders, although I'm sure some of them were, but honestly, they just ran highly stable, multi-generational institutions where regular people could securely deposit wealth against a rainy day. Our second node of operation is the franchise title. In the early Bronze Age, places like the great ziggurat of Ur-Nama in Ur attempted to hoard all wealth inside a single centralized treasury. But as a faith expands across a map, it hits a geographical wall. It is the exact same logistical friction that drives secular feudalism. Your draft animals have to eat while hauling cargo. If a remote village tithes 100 bushels of grain, but it takes 80 bushels of feed just to haul the cart to the high capital, sending that grain across the kingdom makes zero economic sense. Furthermore, how do you send local Corvée labor upstream? You can't. Of course, this is somewhat dependent on your mode of transportation, and if you want advice from me about what mode of transportation to implement, check out my video on that topic linked in the information card. Back to the religion though, to survive this geographic wall, a religion has to enfranchise itself. It has to allow satellite branches, remote monasteries, parish churches, and bishoprics. And those entities have to collect local income, keep the perishable bulk for themselves, and only send a refined, standardized cut up to the central treasury in non-perishable wealth. We see this model everywhere. It is the bedrock of the medieval Roman Catholic Church with its highly organized hierarchy of parishes, dioceses, and archbishoprics. We see it in the spread of rural Buddhist monasteries across East Asia. From a world-building perspective, these franchises are gold mines. Remote monasteries and independent bishoprics are the natural hotbeds for future church politics, schisms, and theological ruptures over different styles of hats. Let's be honest, if your fantasy religion has existed for more than a decade, someone, somewhere has schismed. By looking at the franchise model of your church, you can easily spot the fault lines. Look at who is collecting the money. Notice the liturgical variations that develop in isolation. And then ask yourself, at what point does that regional variation become a full-blown heresy? Node 3 is the miracle economy. How this plays out in your world depends a little bit on your magic system and just how meddlesome your gods are. Because the miracle economy is essentially an engine for holy tourism. Now, why does a church want to attract pilgrims as holy tourists? For the exact same reason modern nations want to attract tourists. You don't get rich selling to yourself, as one of my economic textbooks said at university. On a macro level, moving money around inside a closed domestic system just shifts existing wealth. To truly grow an economy, an entity must inject external capital by selling to outsiders. For a religious institution, your export is salvation, and your marketing tool is a miracle. Whether it's a statue weeping blood, the finger bones of a saint, the historic robes of a Buddha, a sacred Tory gate invested by a nine-tailed fox, or a spring that offers healing energy, miracles draw crowds. And in your fantasy world, if there's real, undeniable magic to back those claims up, you're golden. A genuinely miraculous sight will draw pilgrims by the thousand, all of them bringing their coin. This pilgrimage traffic requires secular infrastructure. Travelers need food, lodging, road security, and currency exchange, which generates enormous revenue for the church-owned land surrounding the shrine. We saw a fascinating evolution of this during the Crusades of the 12th century. As European pilgrims attempted to travel to Jerusalem, the roads were pretty dangerous due to the constant warfare and the rampant banditry and, just the general times. To solve this logistical nightmare, the church sanctioned the creation of the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ, better known as the Knights Templar. The Templars used their religious reputation to solve the trust problem on a continental scale. They allowed a pilgrim to deposit their wealth at a local Templar preceptory in Europe, handed them a coded, encrypted script, and allowed the traveler to withdraw equivalent funds once they arrived safely in the Levant. And if that sounds familiar to you, it's because the Templars invented Western branch banking, built on religious trust. Because they held vast amounts of capital that was completely untaxed, they quickly diversified into real estate and began loaning spectacular sums of money to cash-strapped secular governments. Of course, that accumulation of wealth was their ultimate undoing. By 1307, King Philip IV of France realized that he wouldn't owe the Templars anything if they were dead. So they were branded as heretics, their leaders were burnt, and European monarchs eagerly seized their assets. The miracle economy always breeds institutions that outgrow their altars. When you build your faith, ask, who protects the pilgrims? How does the religion facilitate that security? And what financial monsters grow out of it? And then ask, how do the secular leaders of your world react? And who's your Philip IV? When you are building your fantasy churches, use this 3-step workflow to ground them in reality. Step 1. Follow the coin. Look at your grandest temple and identify its primary economic engine. Is it a sprawling landlord charging rent on vast church estates? Is it a central bank holding the kingdom's gold in reserve? Or is it a holy tourist trap selling salvation? Every single one of these models creates a unique friction with the secular authorities. Find that tension and write it into your plot. Step 2. Map the extraction radius. Apply the logistical math of travel to your world. How far can physical goods move before the cost of transport destroys the value of the tithe? Once you find that boundary, that is where your church must pivot to the franchise model and delegate authority. Map those boundaries because those are your future schismatic fault lines. Step 3. Define institutional sin. Almost every major religion features doctrines warning against the greedy accumulation of wealth. Why? Because faith relies on a shared belief in cosmic fairness. When a church begins accumulating massive untaxed wealth, and it's almost always untaxed, it becomes highly vulnerable to the charges of corruption. Remember, peasants can tolerate paying tithes, and they can tolerate paying taxes. But when they are forced to do both, while the church enjoys tax exemption, a privilege, by the way, that dates back all the way to the Bronze Age cuneiform records, the system gets itchy. So define the institutional sin of your church, because a secular crown is always looking for an excuse to yell heresy if it means they can legally seize the temple's gold. If you need more help implementing your religion, check out my book, Worldbuilding Blueprints, Volume 1, available on my site as an audiobook, an ebook, a PDF, or a paperback in black and white, or a hardback in full color. If you use the code HOLYMONEY, all in caps, one word, I'll throw in a 20% discount on the paperback book. And now, while the amazing members of the channel scroll past, the incredible people who help me pay for my cat's food every month, and thank you all so much, let's look at a great implementation of religion in fantasy literature. The Ardents from Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive series. In the lore of the Vorin religion on the world of Roshar, the priesthood was once organized into a traditional, powerful church hierarchy. However, centuries before the start of the book, the church attempted to establish a complete theocracy. The priests claimed exclusive rights to prophecy, hid knowledge from the populace, and tried to control the political fates of kingdoms for their own spiritual good. Ultimately, this religious coup was violently cast down by the warlord known as the Sunmaker. Instead of eradicating the faith, the secular rulers stripped the priesthood of its independence. In modern Roshar, the priests, now called Ardents, exist in a state of institutional slavery, legally owned by the high princes and monarchs. I made a video about slavery, which you can check out in the information card. This structure of Ardents completely flips the financial burden of maintaining the church. The church no longer extracts wealth. Instead, the crown actively maintains the religion's finances. We've seen similar real-world parallels in ancient and medieval India, where the rulers granted the Buddhist and Hindu temples rights to the harvest, but not the land. The crown maintained legal ownership of the land, but the temples were granted the economic yield to fund their monasteries. Sanderson uses this financial subjugation to create a fascinating social outlet valve. Because the Ardents are property, they are legally stripped of their caste and are socially considered genderless, shaving their heads and stepping outside the strict, rigid gender roles of a Lethi culture. In a hyper-hierarchical society where men are forbidden to read and women are forbidden to even reveal their offhand, becoming an Ardent is the only way to escape that cultural cage. It is a fantastic way to show how a historical financial rupture can reshape the modern social fabric of a world. If you made it this far, leave me a money mouth emoji in the comments below. If you are looking to dive deeper into systemic world building, check out my video on 5 techniques for creating religions, or click on whatever video the almighty algorithm is recommending to you right now. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time World Building.